Hello and welcome to the Eastern Arc webinar on Decolonising the Curriculum. My name is Phil Ward and I'm Director of Eastern Arc, which is a regional research collaboration that brings together the Universities of East Anglia, UEA, Essex and Kent. I am doing a brief introduction to this, recording it separately because the audio on the day let me down slightly and it's quite difficult to hear what I said in my introduction. I wanted to make sure I gave full credit to each of the speakers taking part. There's 6 of them, 3 members of staff and 3 students. Barbara Hedowumi joined Kent in 2017 as a sociology lecturer. She currently works as a postdoctoral research associate in student success to develop and conduct research on BAME, academic progression, engagement and belonging to help close the white BAME awarding gap. She leads the Diversity Mark project in Kent and is joined by the Diversity Mark intern for the project, Patrice Myton. Hannah Gibson is a senior lecturer in linguistics at Essex who works primarily on African languages. She has an interest in languages and identity as well as the relationship between linguistics and social justice. With her is Samira Diabre, who works with the fellow students at Essex to organise a webinar series looking at specific issues of decolonising the curriculum, but also in how the university is governed. Claire Hines is a lecturer in literature and creative writing at UEA. Her fiction and non-fiction writing explores Black British identities, and she's previously worked as a news editor for the Voice newspaper, a writer for national newspapers and a BBC television producer. She's currently leading and implementing on decolonising the curriculum within her school, including the creation of a BIPOC student ambassador scheme. Amy Ibarra-Hempel is one of the ambassadors on the scheme. I started by asking Hannah Gibson to give a bit of background to the movement.
I think the discussion about decolonising the curriculum fits within a broader trajectory of work on anti-racism and within higher education, but also in discussions more broadly. If we sort of step back a little bit kind of in time and think more about discussions which are ensuring that a more diverse range of students and learners got to university, progressed through schooling, got to university, and then had equalities of opportunity when we got there, that was sort of earlier discussions. And I think in more recent years, within that kind of broader framework, there's been discussions of and what happens when you're there, what happens at university, what does the education that you get look like. This is particular focus here on curriculum. So what is the material that we're teaching, what's the material we're learning, but also much broader questions about who is doing the teaching on those courses, what is considered to be key material and what's perhaps optional. What might students graduate from a 3-year degree and not have ever read a text by academics or scholars from particular parts of the world who have a variety of identities. And I think it's fair to say that the decolonising the curriculum discussion is very much also embedded in the discussion about racialised disadvantage at higher education. So also trying to link both the content of material to the outcomes that students have. And I know this is something we'll talk about before as well, and others have been involved in work looking at a variety of awarding gaps, so linking both the content, but then whether we are serving our students through what we teach, how we teach it, how we assess, and who is also doing the teaching. So I think it's a really broad piece of work. It is not new, but I think the emphasis on this, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, that's really in the context of the UK, something that's come out more starkly over the last year, both at university level, but also in primary education, secondary education. What do we get through our education system? And is it fit for purpose? Is it what we think we should get? So it's a question, I think, and is part of a much larger piece of work on this. I think I'm actually going to hand over to Samira perhaps to talk a little bit more about some of the specific work we've been doing at the University of Essex under this umbrella of decolonising the curriculum. Samira, are you happy to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so where do I start? There's a lot of work going on in Essex at the moment. It all started, I believe, well, it all started last year, where Hannah contacted me, and she showed me about Decolonising the Curriculum. We talked about it, and for me, it was something that I already heard of, because at the moment I was the Black officer, and students were kind of like complaining about why their curriculum was so white, why it was so westernized, Euro-centric. I study international relations, so for me it was very visible how my curriculum was set up. And we started this work. It started small. We started with a couple of lectures, a couple of students. I also did a survey. That's my education matter to you, to kind of like understand what was the feeling among students across all different types of degrees when it came to their curriculum. And we started decolonizing the curriculum and anti-racist pedagogy reading group. We worked with the university library as well, who were amazing. They added extra books and readings from BAME authors. Then what else we did? We also worked with the Tackling Racism group of the university, which was actually set up at the time because of the Black Lives Matter protest, and a lot of students came forward complaining about the racism that was going on within the university. So we put it as part of the action plan. And from there, all different departments in the university started working on decolonizing the curriculum. Most department, which was amazing. My favorite one was the Department of Government, who actually led a focus group with students' involvement to kind of understand which steps were necessary to decolonize their curriculum. Because again, there are certain departments, certain modules that it's difficult to say, oh, let me decolonize this module, because if it's scientific, it's kind of like hard to tell what to do, how to do it without actually not ruining the teaching, not ruining what students are ought to learn. So there's that. I know the history department started, the SU. It was kind of like a whole collaboration from different departments, from different parts of the university. And then we started the Decolonizing the Curriculum project, which was a collaboration with between lecturers and students in South Africa, the University of Western Cape, and here at Essex. And it was there that we started the webinar, where we had guest speakers from South Africa, New York. We had here in England, a wide range, variety of people coming. We discussed decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing university in general, because one thing that students also complain a lot is the diversity of the staff when it comes to their curriculum. For example, I don't see anybody within my department that look like me, that can teach me things that, I don't know, are more close to me or close to home. So we looked into the system of university in general. We looked into decolonizing research, what kind of research is usually funded, and why they're more likely to be funded compared to other research. And that kind of also explained why there are there's less literature from BAME authors, because the research that tends to be funded is usually research like Western research, or anyway, is written it's research done by white people in general. So we looked into that. We also looked at decolonize the curriculum more in general. And we brought different departments. We try to understand, because again, it's broad. It's it's wide, and it's difficult to say, okay, this is what we have to do, these are the steps, and once we've done these steps, then we've decolonized completely the curriculum. It's a long process. I'm glad that Essex has started the process. There's a long way to go, but so far we're making small progress, which I'm quite happy and proud to be part of.
Sounds like you're doing huge amounts, Amira, and impressive achievements in that time. I have a couple of, well, I have a million questions, but a couple of questions just for now. One is, you talked about, as a Black officer, a number of people coming forward saying, that, why is my curriculum so white? Can you give me a sense of, was it one or two people? Was it much wider than that? Can you give me a sense of the scale of it?
Yeah, so when I started as Black officer, I had a handover from the previous officer. The previous officer was a BAME officer. I was the first Black officer. That was because they divided, because issues that Black students face are not the same as Asian students face or minority groups face. So we wanted to focus on each group per time. And in the handover, one of the problems was, students are complaining about their curriculum. And it has been something that in the past 3 years always came out in the feedback. So I was like, okay, so we know we have this problem, but what are we doing to actually address it? I asked in the SU education team, and they said, yes, this is a problem that students have constantly told us. We just don't know where to start. And for me, it was clear that they didn't know where to start, because I looked at the team, at the education team, and there was no one Black there. And there was no one Asian. There was no minority. So for me, it came natural to think it's because you don't care. It's because it doesn't affect you directly. That's why it's been there for 3 years and the work has never actually started. I then spoke with other students. I did my own survey, and it was more than 50 students at first before I actually did the survey, because you have student representatives per department, so they come to you, they tell you what's going on. I organize events, and it was constantly out there that students were like, yeah, I don't have any Black lectures, I don't have any Asian lecture, everything I study is boring, it's white, I don't know, I'm not engaged with my studies. And that came a lot, I'm not engaged because there's no engagement. Then another thing that came to me was also, when I was trying to engage with Black students, I realized that there were not enough postgraduate Black students. So I knew by hand how many postgraduate Black students were there, which was crazy because you'd expect that there are a lot more. And that kind of made me think the reason why they're not postgraduate students is because a lot of Black students don't stay after that. So the whole decolonize the curriculum, the whole request was a huge demand. It wasn't just few students or I don't know, a bunch of unhappy students about their degree. It was massive.
I'd like to bring in me at that point, because it was this issue of perhaps an untapped desire, an untapped need, an untapped recognition of what needed to change, was something that you brought up in the podcasts in terms of how the UEA community reacted to you raising the issue. Can you say a bit more about what happened at UEA?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you said Claire or Amy.
I said Amy, but Claire.
Oh,
okay. You remember you raising it in the podcast, and I thought it was really interesting.
At UEA, in the School of Literature, Drama and Creative Writing, which is the school that I do my degree in, and the school that Claire is an academic in, there has been widespread kind of student outrage and desire for change in the curriculum, and people want change now. It's kind of, last year we kind of reached a peak point where a group of students came together and they wrote an open letter to the school, and it was incredibly well researched. And essentially they were saying, we think it's ridiculous how few Black and other racialized minority texts we have on our curriculum. Our curriculum is too white, it's too Euro-centric, there's too many men, there's too many heterosexual texts. And they provided an extensive list of texts that the school could put on the curriculum. So, you know, these students put so much work into it, they did a lot of research, and they were really outraged, and rightly so, because then over 100 students signed the petition, because it was an open letter and sort of a petition at the same time, including myself, because there have been promises to decolonize the curriculum in LDC, kind of similar to what Samira was saying, that the issue, they've been aware of the issue for a number of years, but it kind of needed that push of student demand, that students were actually saying, we are unhappy with what we are being taught, and we are even providing you with things that we would like to be taught, that we would like to be taught, because we have a huge problem, obviously, as a majority English literature department, that we read a lot of the old white canon, which is a lot of white heterosexual men, and it's simply not good enough. I remember starting my course and you know, feeling the overwhelming kind of whiteness in terms of the text we were reading. It would be one or two sort of tokenistic texts that were written by either Black people or other people of color, or if there was like 1 week in the module to do with race, that's where you would get a racialized minorities text. And it was, you know, it's kind of a universal experience for, especially if you're student color in LDC. It's very apparent how white your curriculum is. In terms of student numbers as well, we are kind of far and few between. There's definitely a majority of white students as well as a majority of white academics who are teaching us. So overall, it definitely creates a sense of sort of isolation, where you really feel alone in your degree sometimes, because the texts you're reading are white, the people who are teaching you are most likely white, and you're one of few other people in a seminar room that are usually you know, in person, but you're one of few people who is a person of color. So from myself, I personally always felt the need that change had to happen, and from all the other people I know in the department who are people of color, who are Black, there is a kind of driving sense that the school needs to do better. And that's kind of how I started this job. This was a pilot scheme. So I'm a BIPOC ambassador for LDC, and the pilot scheme was so last year. So this is the second year that it's running. And essentially it was a great opportunity because kind of Claire got in contact with me and she said, we're piloting the scheme to try and make some change in LDC. Would you be interested in applying? And I did, and then I got the job, and it's been brilliant because it's finally kind of more immediate change is finally starting to happen. And the more that we've been kind of engaged with staff and with the school as a kind of wider body, a lot of people now know about us and know about the work we do, and are very enthusiastic about getting involved and doing better and improving as much as they can. So through this scheme, we have been starting to see improvements in the school and in what's happening, but also I do want to emphasize that the students of LDC are brilliant. They're absolutely incredible in saying what they want and saying they want it now. We've got several undergraduate working groups, postgraduate working groups that voluntarily spend their time working together with staff to try and make a change. So both from kind of a paid role such as my own and from a voluntary role, the students are absolutely key to making the change at UEA.
Thanks for that, Amy. Claire, could I come to you to both talk about how the BIPOC ambassador scheme came around and the wider movement within the school, LDC, but within UEA more broadly, and also following up on Samira's point about, you know, how the university engages. She talked about the library being very good, how the university more broadly has been willing to engage and change as a result of the movement.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so as Amy said, we've got a really active student population who are asking for change, who are demanding change, and that's helped us, I think, really in terms of pushing through a number of different initiatives. And as you mentioned, the BIPOC ambassadors scheme is one of those. So we're, you know, it's great that we've got Amy on board in LDC in our school, and we've got another student as well called Amber. And the idea was really that we needed to tackle the levels of engagement by students of colour. It's noticeable when looking at the figures at UEA, but looking at the figures at all universities across the country, that students of colour more likely to drop out, that the engagement levels, the satisfaction levels are likely to be lower than they are for white students, and that the degree outcomes are likely to be lower as well. And that's even when consideration is made for socio-economic background or previous experiences. So students are coming to universities at the same level if they're white students, brown students, black students, and their likelihood of outcome it is going to be less, and that's, you know, that's deeply concerning. So that's been deeply concerning for the university, and obviously it's deeply concerning for the students as well, who are seeing that this is the case. They're seeing that, you know, fellow students are kind of dropping out, that they're not engaging at the same level. So we set up the BIPOC ambassador scheme a couple of years ago, with support from the Students' Union and also from widening participation. So LDC might sound like, you know, there are a lot of student grievances, but actually we're sort of seen as leaders within UEA, that we have been kind of pushing forward on these issues for a time. And the idea is that we pay students, we pay our 2 ambassadors within the school to do work to support students of colour. And it's important that they are paid. I mean, some students might say, oh, well, that's not fair. There are, you know, there are other issues and other students who have issues. But, you know, this is a scandalous problem. It's a really serious problem that needs to be addressed. It's not fair to ask students of colour to do the work for free that's needed. And the universities are seeing that this is, you know, this is something that needs to be tackled. So resources are made available. And so our student ambassadors are able to work on projects to support students. So they set up safe spaces for our students of colour so that they can meet and gain a sense of community. And they're pushing forward other projects as well. They're helping us with our wider decolonising work within the school and inputting in the work that we're doing there. They're working with colleagues to think about questions such as our admissions materials. So there are a whole host of different ways in which they get involved in the life of the school, because previously, you know, students of colour were feeling that they didn't really have a voice. There wasn't this sense of belonging. So it's really, you know, a way of us trying to create an environment that is that affirms and values all students, so that everyone has a kind of equal opportunity to succeed. And then you asked about broader work that we're doing within the university. So I'm the decolonising lead for this school, and this year there were other decolonising leads who have been doing this work across humanities more broadly. There are decolonising networks, that there's work from the students' point of view, from postgraduate students, undergraduate students. There's a UEA decolonising network and society. So there are various ways that we're pushing forward with plans, working both as a school and as a university as well. And our Vice Chancellor is also a leader in terms of leading on an anti-racism task force. So we're trying to address this as a school and as a university as well. And so some of the things that we've done, for instance, are looking at our curriculums. And Amy mentioned, the kind of whiteness of curriculums, and particularly, I guess, with literature, this association of the canon with sort of white men. So, for instance, this year, we launched a new module that all students would need to take called Writing Across Borders, which kind of looks at literature in a kind of broader way and a more sort of more globally, and thinking about the range of different literatures, and literature having a kind of broader meaning, not a narrow meaning. So that's an opportunity for us to look at different writers, different ideas and perspectives. And there are new modules, such as a new whiteness module that are coming on. So there are various things that we do, and staff workshops. We run workshops for staff to think about questions of decolonising. We're looking at communicating better to students what it is that we were doing. And I think, part of the issues were that we were kind of aware as staff that these were issues that we needed to take on board, and we were making changes and not necessarily communicating as well as we could have done. So we have, Blackboard sites. We meet regularly with students. We collaborate on events such as Black History Month events and reading events. So really, kind of making sure that we're working collaboratively as a team on lots of different levels.
That's really helpful, Claire. Thank you for that. It sounds like there's a huge amount going on. Barbara, does that chime with what is going on at Kent, your experience of how the movement took hold in Kent?
Yes, the other universities are doing some fabulous work, amazing work, which does certainly chime with what we're doing at the University of Kent. And there is a historical story to how it kind of started, which was from, obviously, Why is My Curriculum White and Rhodes Must Fall, and the Black Lives Matter campaigns have all kind of given the university and particular activist students the opportunity to answer to that call. And they did so through the Kent Law School, had formed a group of students who consisted of undergraduates as well as postgraduate students of colour, known as Decolonising the University, Kaleidoscope Collective. They were an amazing group of students who took it upon themselves to present a real loud voice, I would say, to say that, all the issues that have been discussed by Hannah and Claire and the students there, that this cannot go on, and action needs to happen. And so what they did was to produce a manifesto, a Kaleidoscope Manifesto, which I can add to the chat as a link later on, which goes beyond, I would think it was quite something to behold, really. For one, they were promoting inclusion, and they were talking about things like race, ethnicity and belonging, and engagement of the curriculum was essential. And the essence of it was that to critically analyse and comment on the status quo of the canon. And also, Kent Law School is also known for its critical analysis of legal issues within British law, and so are able to talk about such things as critical race theory, which is an integral part of what we're doing at Kent to diversify reading lists. But they also do have a professor who leads them, the Kent Law School, who is in fact a Black female professor, Professor Tony Williams, which I think had a lot to do with the support that is needed from leadership level. So that was also important. But the key drivers of it was a senior lecturer called Dr. Soraya Jivaev, and also others within the team, such as Dace Thomas and Cherie Palmer. They were all integral, facilitators. They did not direct the students too much. The students kind of knew what they had to do, which, they took it upon themselves to really devote their energy and emotional labor towards producing the manifesto. And as well as the manifesto, they had conferences about anti-racist education and the need to solve the issues of closing the awarding gap, as well as the leaky pipeline that exists in the progression of postgraduate students. So they were quite well aware of that, and also the need to promote the recruitment of Black staff. There are BAME staff within the institution, but when it comes to more granular, looking at the actual Black staff that are there as professors, they're very few and far between. Also, as part of the activist group of Decolonising the University, they also had anti-racist workshops, which were led by the students. It wasn't led by lecturers. So this had an incredible way of engaging staff to come along and hear what students actually thought about the curriculum and the whiteness of the curriculum. As well as doing workshops, I was part of leading the reading groups on decolonising the curriculum reading groups, which seems to be picking up again, which was great. So I would say that the legacy, because those students have now left and Decolonising the University as a campaign has now ended, but the legacy continues through Diversity Mark project, where we're diversifying reading lists to continue this dialogue between staff and students. That this is an essential component of students being able to, as Claire said, improve on their attainment levels and also the retention levels and progression of students of colour. So that's been key.
Thank you. So that was quite interesting that you talked about the Decolonising the Curriculum initiative ending. It feels like it's something which needs to be ongoing, and I guess the diversity mark is one manifestation of that. But is there any concern on your part that the initiatives run out of steam in some way because it's come to an end, or has it just morphed into a different form of approach?
Yeah, I would say that it has definitely morphed into a different approach, because I was part of the movement then, so I have sort of made sure that it continues to create other interventions and other ways that students can get involved by actively talking about the whiteness of the curriculum, and particularly areas such as the core reading lists. Core reading lists are very different from the additional reading lists. Core reading lists are the must-read literature in all schools, and those core reading lists tend to be the ones that give you the marks in your assignments according to students. So students have asked me, for example, when I was a lecturer, is it okay to use something that's not in the core reading list, that's not even on the additional reading list, that I can relate to? And I've responded obviously by saying, of course you can do that, as long as you answer the question and you justify it, etc. But just, sensing the fact that they feel that they may be penalized for using, material which is from the Global South, or an alternative text which the convener is not familiar with, kind of sends messages and signals as to conveners and lecturers not being able to fully understand or to be fully competent, culturally competent of the literature of that's out there across the world. And it should be more appreciated and recognized. So this is still very much, I would say, very much alive, this debate about the whiteness of the curriculum, the engagement of students, and the sense of unbelonging that exists on campus, in Canterbury campus and in Medway campus, because we have two campuses. And what's quite unique about Kent, as you know, Kent is a very white space. However, our university on the Medway campus consists of nearly 60% of BAME students. And the campus, Canterbury campus, consists of now 41% of BAME students. So what we're saying is that the curriculum is not reflecting the student body right now. And students are kind of up in arms about this, to be quite honest with you, because we found this out through focus groups that Patrice has amazingly, excuse me, my throat, has amazingly facilitated, as well as other students that we've had as diversity mark interns. We first had 2 diversity mark interns in the pilot that we did in 2017 in Medway campus, who've now gone on to do greater things. And that won Talus Aspire Award for the collaboration of staff and students and the library, making the actual reading list more diverse and producing a kind of a toolkit for the university staff to use, because I remember Samira saying, where do we start? You know, staff were wondering, well, how do we even start to, diversify our lists? So we have produced a toolkit to do that. And also having the ability to show that students can have a voice is really important. And also to show that the diversity of the curriculum does matter. You know, it's not just something that, it's not a matter of just adding a few books from Black authors, from authors from the Global South, just say that you've diversified your list. It doesn't work that way. You know, there's certain processes and protocols that we have put in place in order for you to deserve the award of diversity mark against your module, so that students can see that there has been a moral and essential effort being used to address these issues.
Thanks for that, Barbara. You mentioned the toolkit, and before you mentioned the Kaleidoscope Manifesto. Is the toolkit available to anyone, or is that just a Kent focused?
No, we have a blog page that the library has put together, so you can actually see what the process is. So no, we're quite happy to share the actual toolkit process with other universities. And within the University of Kent, it was a slow take up at first, but now we have over 8 schools across the university who are now interested in being involved in diversifying their reading list. So it's really taken off. Yes.
Thank you. I don't want to put you on the well, I am putting you on the spot, but if you could share the link on the chat to both the manifesto and the toolkit.
Yes.
That would be either now, or I can send it around by email afterwards if you want to take a moment to think about it, but that would be great to share it.
Yes, I'll certainly do. Yes.
Thank you. Patrice, I want to bring you in as the intern on the Diversity Mark project that Barbara was talking about. Can you talk a bit about your work in that? What does it actually mean? What is your work in this area consist of?
Well, my role initially consisted of auditing and looking into the reading list. So I had the opportunity to look into the SSPSSR department, which is like social studies and sociology, cultural studies. So I got to look into the reading list to see for myself, am I being reflected in the reading list? And I had a few assumptions here and there, and I did presume that it would be majority white males, because that doing sociology over the years, that's what I've been accustomed to. That's what I'm used to seeing, even though it is quite a broad subject, and they talk about a lot of diverse things and social issues, and it is quite important. But yeah, I got the opportunity to see for myself, and from looking into the reading list with the other diversity mark interns, we confirmed our presumptions about the reading list. And we also got the opportunity to talk to students, our fellow students, our peers, about how they felt about it and how they saw themselves in the curriculum. So we would talk to the students. We had about 2 focus groups. We got a chance to do 2 focus groups prior to COVID becoming an issue. So I got to be a part of one of them, and they led it with one of my other diversity mark officers. And we were just talking to the students. We wanted them to give us their opinions and think about it as well, because I feel like a part of being a university student sometimes is you are so accustomed to certain things that you don't always try and challenge it because you're so used to it. But we gave the opportunity for them to give us their opinion on everything, which was quite interesting. I learned a lot, and I feel like I got to have a discussion about how I was feeling as well. And I feel like a lot of the students were happy to be able to voice their opinions. So the next stage has kind of been understanding the research and trying to do what we can to change how it isn't within the university. So as Barbara mentioned, there's the toolkit so that the members of staff can be aware of the fact that things need to change. So right now it's kind of like putting into place the measures to change how diverse the curriculum currently is within the university.
Thank you, Patrice. This is something we covered in the podcast, but I think it's worth raising again. Can you give an indication of the assessment, the audit that you did of the curriculum? Just a sense of, roughly how white or how BAME, how the ratio or the percentage of white and non-white within the curriculum.
I believe the reading list was about 80% white in comparison to all the other races. And I feel like I cannot remember off the top of my head, but there was also quite a small percentage of white women as well, as in addition to white men. However, the majority was white authors and academics within the reading list.
And sorry, Barbara, do go ahead.
Sure. I can add to the statistics on that. Yes, so it ranged from about 70% up to 80% that were white male authors. And with females, it ranged from about 26% that were white female authors, and Black female authors were only 3%, and Black male authors were just 2%. So some really, shocking statistics there. Back to Patrice.
Yeah, that's very stark. That was SSPSR, which is I always get this name wrong. School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research. Is that common across other schools, other curricula, or have you not had a chance to do that similar assessment in other areas?
Well, Patrice focused on SSPSR, as you know. So for what we're gathering from other schools, yes, it's pretty similar. It's a pretty similar match, actually. But there are specific modules within, different schools, which you may see a little bit of an improvement, but it's nothing to celebrate, let's say. So there's a lot of work to be done still in different schools.
Thank you. Hannah and Claire, I'd be interested, has any similar kind of auditing work been done at Essex and UEA? and also thinking, I was quite struck by, I'm not statistics fixated, but it's quite interesting just to get a sense of percentages here. What Barbara was saying about 60% of students at the Medway campus were BAME, and at Canterbury 41%, which was higher than I thought, and makes an even stronger case of why there needs to be more, that needs to be reflected more in the curriculum. Do you get any sense, do you have the statistics at Essex and UEA for both the whiteness of the curriculum, but also the percentage of the student base which is of colour? Claire, do you want to go first?
Yeah, we haven't actually carried out an audit in that way, and I'm not entirely sure on the statistics in terms of the proportion of students of colour to white students. I mean, I have looked at them, but I can't remember them. But I think one of the way that we've been approaching this has been to, I mean, firstly, with thinking about our students of colour and the particular support that's needed there in terms of improving the experience, but also thinking about decolonising as, yes, this is an issue that in which students of colour are on the sharp end of this, and but also thinking about the fact that this impacts on white students' experience, you know, in quite substantial ways. They're coming to university to get a broad education to further their knowledge, and if what's happening is, you know, what white students have been vocal on this within our university and elsewhere, because they're feeling shortchanged. They're feeling like, well, you know, we're coming to university to study literature, creative writing, drama, and we want to feel as if we're getting, you know, a substantial education, one in which has relevance to the world around us now, that takes into consideration various ideas and viewpoints and perspectives and values, you know, a broad range of talent. So I think, you know, just thinking about that in different ways, I think the audit is really useful, but I think also for us thinking as well, not just about what we're teaching. And I think, you know, the comment was made earlier about this not being a tick box exercise, and we're not saying, oh, okay, well, how many black and brown writers have we got in the curriculum? Let's add in a few more. You know, sometimes it might be a case of saying, well, you know, how can we teach differently as well? What are the different approaches that we can bring to the classroom? How can we think about the power dynamics in the classroom? How can we think about the assessment methods that we're using to make sure that they're broad and far-reaching, and that different students from different backgrounds are able to you know, showcase their knowledge in different ways? How can we look at a broad range of perspectives? So if we are looking at a text by a white male author, how can we think about this differently? So, you know, something like Moby Dick. I know Amy will back me up here, but you know, Amy did some work with our other student ambassador last year, contributing to a workshop and discussing the ways in which, you know, we might be dealing with, you know, writers, canonical writers, but how can we think about Moby Dick and think about, for instance, the whiteness of that as a text? You know, sometimes it's about it's looking about at the gaps and silences in terms of those kind of conventional texts as well as new texts. So I think it's about you know, broad and wide-ranging approaches to decolonising, and thinking about decolonising as really impacting on the quality of education for all students. I think sometimes there might be a misconception that if we're talking about decolonising, it means that we're offering, you know, it means less good quality. You know, we're having to go out of our way to find these new brown and black people to put in, and you know, we've been doing it well for all these years, but actually what we're saying is, let's improve the quality of our education for all students. Let's, you know, this is about teaching excellence, that we're looking at, we're reviewing what it is we teach and how we teach it, and it's going to benefit all students.
I think that's a really important point. I like that phrase you had, you know, identifying the gaps and silences, and through doing that and through engaging in a different way, increasing the quality for all students. It isn't just about one group or another. That's a really important point. Hannah, can I come back to you about the stats, or if you want to comment further on what Claire and the others have said?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to comment on both points. So in terms of the audit, I actually spoke to one of Barbara's colleagues, Laura Bailey, who is also a linguist, so we know each other from other forums. And that's when I first heard about the diversity mark. And I think the discussion was, oh, these are the numbers we found at Kent. They're broadly in the 70 to 80% white male range. And we thought, okay, like, you know, I'll take that and then do the next piece of work. Because actually, you know, I think we decided it wasn't a good use of our time and energies at that point, especially since that Kent had obviously already done this work. And it obviously does vary from subject to subject, individual modules. There's been lots of discussion today about like core reading and additional reading and things like that. But I think we sort of took that, you know, on face value and then worked with that. And I think one of the things that, if I've understood the diversity mark correctly, which I really am a big fan of, is the discussion that you include in reading lists in this case. So, you know, just to perhaps go back to Claire's point about Moby Dick, it may well be that you have a module which is about a very particular era where, you know, actually you are studying the, you know, philosophy or political thought of, you know, 10 white men who were all born within a 50-year range of each other. But what we can't really afford to do is continue with the silence that goes on around that and say, as a result, you know, we need to say, so actually the core texts for this module are all written by, you know, white men or white men who were in present day Greece, you know, in this era. And I need to be explicit about that and acknowledge that, and then also draw in the extensive body of work that has built on that literature, which is by people from, you know, the global majority, Black authors, people who are marginalized in other ways, as well as racially marginalized communities. So I think including that discussion in your reading lists, but also in your classroom, right, or on your online classes, saying, you know, this is what we're teaching, this is who we're teaching, and also increasingly kind of encourage myself and my colleagues to do this, and this is who I am, and this is the position that I'm teaching this from. Because even, you know, although I am now a teacher, I've also been subjected to exactly the same education system, right? Like it is my own, you know, fantastic conversations with students, colleagues, and my own kind of interrogation of this that has got me to think about these things. But I have also received this same, you know, Anglo-centric education, particularly in earlier years, right? Primary, secondary education. So I think having those discussions about what we're studying, reading lists, but that's not really the only thing that we do. What do we think are the core concepts, the core ideas, the core timelines that we work with in our disciplines, whatever they are? And what is problematic about that? I think we have to be much more honest and upfront about that. And I think actually everyone can do that, you know, pretty much tomorrow, right? I mean, you don't actually need to necessarily make any changes apart from saying, this is what's here, and this is the vast body of work that is not here at the moment. So I think there's interesting work to be done there about talking about things in much more open terms. I know people are sharing links. Kingston University have also put together their inclusive curriculum framework, and they have prompts. So again, stepping away from the idea of a checklist, but like, you know, who is on this list and why? You know, who is involved in designing this module? So one of the pieces as part of Decolonising the Curriculum work that's taking place at Essex, that the university, there's a fund for this, involves people working out, I want to propose a new module, but I want to think about this before I do it. I'm going to have a focus group have a colleague in sports science and exercise rehabilitation science who wants to put a module together and is talking to students and talking to colleagues beforehand and thinking about these issues. And that takes work. That's one piece of one way of doing this kind of work. But yeah, I can share the link. The Kingston Inclusive Curriculum Framework encourages you to ask these questions of yourself. Those of us who are educators, who are teachers. The other question about ratio of students and staff, there are some other people here from the University of Essex who might actually be better placed to answer this question than myself. I think the main point, so I won't share statistics here, the main concern in my eyes, and I think many of my colleagues and students, is the ratios. So we have a growing body of students who are from Black backgrounds, who identify as Black, who identify as being from minority ethnic communities, people of colour, a variety of different identities, some of which they have before coming to the UK, and some of which then they, is part of being in the UK perhaps. And that is not at all reflected in the staff body. So whatever the specific percentages are, we are not reflecting that in our staff. So there are concerns there. Samira talked about that, about postgraduate students. Barbara talked about this idea of the so-called leaky pipeline. If we want to have more Black professors, more professors who, people of colour and all sorts of other identities, we need to ensure that your first year at university is one where you feel you have a chance to have a sense of belonging, chance for input on your material, perhaps see yourself reflected in the content and see that there's a value of what you're learning. And so I think a big call is for that, ratio to change, and also underlyingly the university to change. So if we are just attracting more Black students, we're attracting more students, but we're not changing what we think is an education, and we're not allowing ourselves to reflect on whether what we're teaching is appropriate for all students, then we're not doing our jobs. And again, it's all been very student-led. It is students who are saying this is simply not good enough, and we expect and deserve much better than this. So I think it's, perhaps not the specifics numbers, but that real imbalance, I think, is cause for concern.
Thanks very much, Hannah. A number of things I want to follow up on there. But before I do so, I'm just conscious that I've not allowed enough time for perhaps people coming in if they want to come in. Are there particular questions from people here who aren't on the panel who might want to ask the panel any questions? I'll leave that there, and I'll keep watching the chat as we go along. One of the things that came up in the chat, which I thought was really interesting, was David's stats on LDC. Once again, I'm not fixating on stats, but it does demonstrate the difference, I guess, depending on your discipline. And one of the things Samira mentioned right at the beginning is that perhaps the science disciplines are forced. I don't know if forced is the right word, but perhaps don't have that ability to diversify perhaps as much as other areas. Do you get any sense of whether that is just the state of play? That's the way the particular disciplines are, or is it an unwillingness of people within those particular disciplines to engage with diversifying the curriculum, or even just having those prompts or thinking about the works differently? Who should answer that? I don't know. Let's Samira, if I can come back to you, as a start in answering that.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, I think there is a lot of unwillingness to actually try and diversify those modules. That is because, well, a lot of scientific methods, they had been people involved in the creation, and yeah, you don't see their names coming out when you talk about it. So, well, I studied mostly political science. So you would say that a lot of the scientific methods, they don't really involve people per se. But when I'm being taught about those modules, there are examples that are being used to show me how that method would work. So I can see what type of examples one person is more likely to use and how many times they use those type of examples. So if you use the examples, and in each example, I never see nothing about me, or you use the examples where most of the time is a negative connotation or a negative stereotype about things that I relate to, I can see that. So I wouldn't say that it is difficult, yes, because most of the literature on scientific methods is written by white people. That is because most of the BAME literature was erased, or perhaps is not written yet, because, for example, if we go to African countries and we look into the history, most of the languages are not written. So you lose a huge amount of knowledge per se in that area. So I wouldn't say it is difficult, but it's not impossible. It's more like, are you willing to put in the work or are you not? So, yeah.
Sorry, mute that whole question. Claire.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I just turned to get a book off my bookshelf because which is Decolonising Methodologies by Linda Tui Smith. So basically, I think, yes, it's going to be difficult to decolonise the sciences if we're thinking about incorporating more Black and brown writers into curriculums in a kind of, in a sort of numbers way. And although I recognise that those audits are really, really important and a great starting point. So if we're thinking about this, within the kind of structures that we have already, then we might say, well, there aren't, this can't be done. We just can't find enough people to do that. But if we're thinking about decolonising, which is more about shifting paradigms of thought and kind of intervening in a more substantial way, then there's just a whole wealth of knowledge out there that is untapped, and I think it's really exciting. So the book that I cited is discussing Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and it's not to say that people in the global south in various parts of the world haven't been doing science. They've been doing it in different ways, and we're not taking advantage of the various forms of knowledge out there at the moment. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done to do that, to include these, to think about the various forms of knowledge that we're not utilising within the universities.
Yes, Hannah.
Can I just come on the science point as well? I think a couple of points. I completely agree with what Claire said. I think one of the things is also about modes of assessment. So if we're thinking of decolonising as a much broader movement, I think people, subjects where there are sort of categorically right or wrong answers, facts that you have to learn, again, have tended to sort of show smaller discrepancies in terms of awarding gaps and subjects like that. So I think thinking about modes of assessment where we bring ourselves in and our biases can be part of that. So perhaps there are things to be learned from sciences in that respect. But I think also just to talk about the potential sort of silencing. So, we have a school of health and social care, and one of our colleagues talks about, if you're teaching, diagnostics, is your assumption that the person that you're caring for, the patient, has white skin? If that is your starting point when you're teaching how to diagnose, a rash or, something like that, then, okay, here, perhaps if we're talking about decolonising the curriculum reading list, that's not quite the right way to think about that. But if you're taking the unmarked patient as a white person, then you are already, already making that assumption. And that's something that we should be teaching our, healthcare professionals, our students who are studying, healthcare, and actually all of our students. What do you assume will be the people on the receiving end of your research, of your treatment, if it's a kind of clinical or professional education as well that you're doing? So I think all of these things are closely related. And then I think my final point as a linguist, I think it's very easy, and this is what Samira was pointing at. So I think as linguists, we've often thought, oh, we're sort of scientists really, and so we don't need to engage in this because we're not introducing the kind of racialized disadvantage that Claire says, students enter with the same grades and university introduces inequality. But if it's a science, we can't be doing that. And actually, it's just not simply not true. So again, I think we need to not take that as a, we still need to do something in those subjects as well.
Thank you, Hannah. I think, and I think that's really, it's a way of thinking almost as much as stats or anything else, or changing reading. This is going back to Claire's earlier point. It's a way of thinking differently about our curricula, also the way we work, also the way we ask questions and so forth. Thinking more broadly about changing the culture beyond shifting that 80% curriculum. Do you get any feeling, I guess in order to change the culture, there needs to be a much more diverse institution, certainly in the staff. And in order for that to happen, it might be the case that students of colour are encouraged perhaps to go further in terms of higher education. I think it was Samira made the point earlier about the dropout rate and so forth for BAME students, but also down to issues of recruitment, perhaps how the recruitment processes at universities are perhaps discriminating against people of colour in the processes. Do you think there's an appetite within the universities to make the significant and necessary changes that will change the culture so that there's less need to audit curricula or do those other things which you're having to do at the moment to balance things? Barbara, can I come to you on
that? Yeah, sure. Of course, I would say that the Office for Statistics, OFS rather, they have now picked up on this in a big way about the progression of postgraduate students who are at your particular university, and what are you doing in terms of recruiting and retaining those students to go on to do masters or PhDs. And there's actually a bid now out for a huge amount of money that you can pitch for, universities can pitch for, to find ways of working with the leadership teams, working with your graduate school, for example, to come up with ways that will improve the communication, because that's one of the key things there is how do you communicate to your BAME students at an earlier stage of, perhaps like their second or just going into their third year of their undergraduate course, providing things like not only information about postgraduate courses, but also having conversations about how well they're doing, and instilling confidence in them that you can have you actually thought about doing a postgraduate course, because I think you'd be really good. So those sorts of micro affirmations are very far and few between. Some BAME students have found, and have said to me, well, I don't even know what a PhD is. No one's ever spoken to me about it, and I find that to be incredibly shocking, because you need to know these things at a much earlier stage in order to be part of the race to get there, because it's a very competitive field to get funding, as you know. And this is a whole debate that's going on with an organisation called Leading Roots, who put out a report about the whole gap between communication and funding and equality for Black students who want to go on to do a PhD or a master's degree, but particularly PhDs is a key issue at the moment, because some students are actually wanting to be part of the academia, you know, but they can't do that unless they have confidence in themselves that I can go for a PhD. So yeah, there are many debates going on at the moment about the opportunities that should be made available and are not made available within graduate schools at university. So something is going wrong at various stages of that pipeline. So it's more or less a porous pipeline, you know, where different aspects of it needs to be addressed. And this is something that I've been looking at through my research. And so it's something that Kent is taking very seriously, because, as you know, our staff do not reflect our student body, and we need to do something about that. Yes.
I'd be interested to hear the students' experience, the students here, their experience of this. Patrice, maybe I could come to you to just get a sense of your experience as a Black student in a predominantly white environment. Did you get any sense of not having the same opportunities, or nothing even as explicit as that, of not feeling that progression to a PhD, if that's what you want to do, is for you? I'd be interested in your experience.
Well, I would say that going into higher education, I wish I knew a little bit more about it. Like, I wish I had had more insight in what, like, the process, more like, okay, so you have an undergraduate and then you have like a master's and you have a postgraduate. I wasn't really made aware of that until I got to university. So I feel like for me, I would have loved a lot more knowledge in regards to what I could potentially do with my degree and how I could progress with it, or I could try something else. I wish that there was more of that given to me. And I feel like even as a university student, it's quite difficult to get to get what you need, to know what you need to progress. So it's like you can look into different things, but looking for opportunities on campus, for example, it wasn't really promoted the way that I feel like it should be. I feel like when you enter your undergraduate, you should be aware of all these different things that you can do post your undergraduate and how you can stay and you can go into research. I feel like emphasis isn't really put on that. Like, that's my personal experience. I feel like it could potentially be the degree that I'm doing, because I feel like within maybe more science degrees and they might push for that more, but within my degree, I feel like there was very little emphasis on what you could do after your undergraduate and prior to getting to university. I feel like it was more like just get to university, as opposed to go to university, you can do this after, or you can go into this field. So I feel like, me personally, there wasn't enough emphasis put on that. And I don't know if that is just because I'm Black or if that's because of the schools I went to or anything like that, but that is my personal experience.
Thanks, Patrice. Amy, I saw you nodding away there. Do you share that experience?
I personally I have a different experience, because I am kind of extremely lucky and privileged to have a parent who's in academia. So I've grown up around an academic environment my entire life. And like I said, I've been incredibly lucky to have a parent who I can go to if and when I had questions. I was able to go to them and say, you know, can you explain this to me? So I think that's quite a unique experience, because obviously not everyone has a parent in academia. But I totally agree that there is not enough kind of, I suppose, like awareness brought to students before and during university about the various things that you can do. So the way Patrice is saying that, like, before you come to university, it's very much just like get into uni and you'll figure it out afterwards kind of thing. Like when you're in sixth form in college, it's kind of just like get in, just do your UCAS, get your offer, you know, off you go kind of thing. Within the uni as well, I would agree that there's not very clear kind of, I guess, I think specifically because I do an English literature and creative writing degree, there's kind of not very much, I suppose, support in kind of like knowing if you want to stay in academia, for example, because a lot of students who do my degree end up going into publishing, or they go into writing their own kind of fiction. They kind of go out into the literature and publishing industry. And I kind of had an assumption that that's what I would be doing for the most of my life, or like most of my kind of academic life at university. But I kind of relatively recently in the last year realized that actually I do want to stay in academia, and that's what I want to kind of pursue. And like I said, thanks to my parent in academia, I've been able to get support and kind of advice, but it shouldn't have to be just because I'm lucky enough that I have a parent in academia. There should be explicit support systems within all degrees at all universities that say, okay, if you want to stay in academia, for example, or you want to use it as you want to stay and then go into something else, there should be more clear advice. And especially when you are a Black person or a person of color, a racialized minority, I think it's especially important to kind of say, this is how we can support you in trying to get you into particularly academic spaces, because I mean, I'm not an academic, but I know that it's very difficult to become an academic and to stay in academia. So I think that while all students need kind of more guidance on what they can do in the future, and not just when you get to third year, kind of when you get emails like, okay, here, you need to start thinking about your future. I think it should be before university, in first year and second year and third year, how many years are in your kind of degree. But particularly students of color, Black students, need to have the extra support because they are at a kind of disadvantage of like the awarding degree gap disadvantage. So fundamentally at university, there should be, I mean, kind of, you know, what Barbara was saying, what she was saying, that there needs to be more support, because otherwise you're kind of just left on your own, you have to figure it out. And it shouldn't be because of kind of a situation of luck that you're able to kind of go into something.
Thanks, Amy. Samira, do you feel you got the advice and support necessary even before you entered university, and certainly in your time at university?
Mine is a bit different. So I went to high school in Italy. So when you go to high school in Italy, there are different like degree you do in high school, and you specialize in like on a certain specific thing. And if you know already that you are going to go to university, there's a specific degree that you do that after that degree you cannot work, you just have to go to university. And in Italy there is a very clear system of like go to high school, go to university, and this and that. However, as an immigrant person, for me it was a bit different, because at the time when I was doing high school, there weren't really a lot of Black people in Italy, even though now there's a lot of immigrants, but there weren't a lot. And definitely there weren't a lot going to university. Only this year I saw like 5 Black people graduating from university, and it was just an amazing celebration. So I didn't know much about the academia world. I only knew, okay, I'm going to university. I'll be the first in my family to go to university. After that, I'll find a job and I'll move on. So when I came here first, there were opportunities about, doing PhD, doing masters and things like that. But I feel like the way they were promoted, they were not promoted to me. So I will be in class and the teacher will be saying about certain scholarships and opportunities. But to me, it was not like he was talking to me. I felt like he was talking to someone else. So my mind was just like, okay, yeah, can we just get over with it? Because I know this is not for me. And I remember when the first time ever someone told me, oh, Samira, you could do a PhD, I laughed because I was like, it's impossible because I just look around yourself and I don't see myself being in academia at all. So I think promotion, like marketing, universities needs to work on that a lot because the way they just promote it is it's not targeted. It's not fair, and there's no support for BAME students either because when it comes to do the applications and for these opportunities, it's hard to find a mentor or a supervisor that can understand first your research, what you're interested in, because if I'm interested in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and there is only one person in the department, or there's no person in the department that it's specialized in that topic, it would be hard for me to find a supervisor willing to actually supervise me and, further write me a letter of reference. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done on these opportunities. And also another thing I've noticed while doing applications was that opportunities for BAME students are mainly if you want to study something related to BAME issues. And I feel like that is very wrong and dividing because it kind of like put BAME people into the box that if I want to study race, there is scholarships for me to go and study race. If I want to study ethnicity or, think of things surrounding that area, I have opportunities, I have scholarships, but then if I want to go and study economics, history, or something like that, I don't find anything for me. It's kind of like excluding, and then you can see why you have a certain amount of people doing certain type of degrees compared to others, because there's no opportunities, there's no possibility. So yeah,
really interesting, Samira, and I think that's a really important point to end on: the need to mainstream, the need to normalize and just make as part of the opportunity and the experience that opportunity for people of color, but also, and this has come up, the benefit to everyone of doing so, of that questioning, that prompting, that seeing things from different angles and different positions will benefit everyone in higher education and society more broadly. So thank you all for taking part in this. As with the podcasts, I feel we could carry on talking for another 90 minutes and still not cover nearly as much ground as we want to. So thank you, Amy, thank you, Samira, thank you, Hannah, Patrice, Barbara, and Claire. It's been really informative, interesting, and incredibly valuable. I'll make this recording available on our events website, so do have a listen, but do pass it on to others who weren't able to make it, because I think the more people who are aware of the conversation and aware of the issues, the better we will be going forward. So thank you all, and hope to see you around. Goodbye.